G'day there guys, it's your Aussie hubby Marky, back at it again with another r/revenge video. Now if you love me like I love you, then you know what to do. Want you to mosey on over to that old like button and tackle it like bloody Crocodile Dundee. Maybe even chuck an Aussie flag down in the comments. Now with that said, I want you to sit back, relax, chuck a prawn on the barbie, and get ready for some bloody revenge. Now our first post is by You Might Know Me Mate, titled, I froze my psycho neighbor out of her apartment. In college, my two friends and I decided to find a place together off campus. We found a beautiful 3-bedroom house with surprisingly affordable rent. The basement of the house was listed as a separate apartment, but as it had a separate entrance and the indoor stairwell had been blocked off, we weren't worried, and the thermostat was upstairs. Then, the demon neighbor moved in. From upstairs, we could hear everything. This adult woman would call her mother and scream at her to pay for her cell phone bills and give her grocery money, aka Taco Bell and cheap tequila. She would scream at whatever guy she was sleeping with to bring her meth, and one day she brought home 3 puppies to scream at too. We were terrified of this woman, and the noise was hell. Also, we'd been idiotic enough to sign a lease stating we were responsible for all utilities, period. Meaning we were now financing her gas, water, and electric. But with only 2 months left on the lease, we thought we could just ride it out. But then she started smoking, constantly. According to the landlord, she had quit for good when she had signed the lease, but for good only lasted 2 days. Since it was winter, the heat was running nearly 24/7, and the smoke was wafting up from the vents. Our apartment and all our belongings began to reek with smoke. We contacted the landlord because we'd signed for a bloody non-smoking apartment. He told us we lived in a state where you could technically call an apartment non-smoking, even if it shared ventilation with the smoking apartment. Screw you, leasing laws. At this point, my 2 roommates were heading out for a 2-week vacation. They were online students while I was residential, leaving me alone in the apartment with the demon smoker in the basement. I couldn't sleep or eat because my idiotic stomach decided to react to all the secondhand smoke by aching and cramping constantly. After 3 days, I was a little insane. I made a plan. I checked the forecast, lows in the 20s all week. I borrowed a friend's ultra-insulated sleeping bag. I bought one of those ski masks with the holes in it from your eyes and mouth. I got out my stocking cap, my silk long underwear, my woolen socks, and my down parka. I bought tea, hot cocoa, and ramen, and prepared to live off of a diet of hot liquids. And I turned off the fudging heat. Day 1, she's screaming at her mother for forcing her to move into this frozen crap hole of an apartment. Day 2, she's screaming at her boyfriend, or meth dealer, because he won't let her move in with him. Day 3, she's screaming at the landlord about how she's fudging freezing. Day 4, the landlord is at my door. I greet him in full ski mask, parka, stocking cap array, looking like I'm heading out to rob Santa Claus at the North Pole. He asks me if I don't find it a little chilly in the house. I reply, I had found all of that cigarette smoke a little warm. Day 5, she's screaming about the bitches upstairs to anyone who will listen, and I'm sitting upstairs clutching my car keys and my pepper spray with 9/11 typed into my phone. She finally decides she's fudging leaving and moving in with Greg, even though he just got out for stabbing Travis and he lives with that fudging creepy house in the woods with all those jerk-biting dogs. Day 6, she's gone. I silently bless Greg. Moral of the story, there's a bloody reason the rent seems too good to be true. P.S. For those wondering, I did have a friend who worked plumbing stop by to give me some advice about how low I could go before I burst water pipes to hell and back. Jeez, this person evil. You're so evil. Remind me not to move in with them. It's a good mental note here. Alright, gamers, our next post is by Call Me Swellington, titled, The Girl Friday with the PhD Takes Over the Business from Ungrateful Owner. This is a long tale. It is also a textbook case of why you don't abuse loyal associates. So my spouse was the second person hired at a consulting company in a very specialized industry. In her 15 years with the firm, it grew to a respectable 3-office, 8 to 10 employees at each location entity. She and the owner grew the business on the contacts, expertise, and presentation of my wife, to the extent that my wife's abilities and education were the main reason the new business came through the door. Over the years, her scope of responsibility grew so that the owner was basically 75% absent and mostly unaware of the day-to-day activity. As he got more and more removed from the business, he would make overtures that he would eventually retire and sell her the business. He was so dependent on her income generating that he took out a life insurance policy on her. I did not involve myself too much, but at a major industry party I attended with her, he introduced my wife to the table as My Girl Friday, basically a secretary, which was weird. Over the years, she tried to get an agreement in place to buy the firm, even if it was years away. He always delayed and made promises, but never followed through. I told her, this guy doesn't respect you or your contribution. He will never sell you the business because there is no reason to. He can make more money by stringing you along, and essentially, you are the business. Why would he sell it to you? One day, out of the blue, my wife received a raise and a bonus, a very minor amount of money, and a contract that included a non-compete, non-disclosure agreement. After reading it, she realized that the owner was trying to lock her down from leaving for another firm. She had been getting feelers from other companies. To make things even more suspicious, she received a call from a competitor who said they were in final stages of due diligence and they wanted to meet her. The jerk was selling the company and didn't think to tell her or ask if she was interested in buying it. She ignored the agreement, and there were no other agreements in place. She was totally free. My wife is extremely loyal. She has missed so many special days working for this guy, stuck around when they were wobbly, even skipped paychecks when there were tough financial times. She was furious, the absolute maddest I've ever seen her. We discussed starting her own firm, and I asked, how much business is contractually obligated to stay there if you leave? It turned out that most agreements were either handshake or 30-day at will. I also asked how many would leave with you. She said about 75%, including her biggest source of revenue who didn't even know the owner. In a very short time, my wife took a 3-week vacation. She had months of unused time, during which time she rented an office in the same building and made all the arrangements to set up a new shop. She agreed to leave any and all company property behind and do her best to give the old company no obvious ammo for litigation. She called her clients and said, I'm leaving. If you want to look into relocating your account with my new company, you'll need to quit the old one before we can discuss it. Most understood the implication. While she was on vacation, she received a panicked call from her boss. We lost XYZ company. Do you know anything about it? She said, I'm sorry, but I just sent you an email. I've resigned. All my keys and company stuff is on my desk. Bye-bye. The new firm took basically 90% of the business and seamlessly transitioned into the same company as it was before, but with a new owner. Even most of the office staff would come aboard. Within a year, her old company closed down except for the small office her old boss ran. She sees him once in a while and he just scowls at her. Nice. Alright, our next post is by RK9J, titled, Slumlord Loses His Business Over $300 Security Deposit. I rented a little house from a man who owned a painting business. The power was off when he came to see the property, but he assured us everything worked, even put it in the contract. The place was dirty and poorly maintained, so we negotiated the security deposit down to $300. Turned out the heat and air didn't work, along with the refrigerator and dishwasher. I asked him to have someone look at them, and he cursed me up and down. He called and left threatening voicemails. He would show up unannounced and let himself in. On one of the visits, I showed him that the crawl space was flooded and was a breeding ground for thousands, if not millions of cockroaches and mosquitoes that would come up through the floor vents. There was absolutely no ductwork, even though he claimed the heat and air worked fine. He accused me of causing the flood myself, even though I showed him the source was a pipe that had rusted through. He refused to address any problems, and said if you don't like it then you can move. You can't pay for a bargain and expect to live in the Ritz. This man was a terrible man in general. Once he hired someone off Craigslist to cut down a tree in the rental property's yard. The man worked literally all day for the agreed $150, cut up and hauled off the tree. He came back that evening, just standing in the yard. I asked if I could help him. He said he was waiting for the owner to get paid. The owner kept replying saying he was on the way, but never showed up. Our neighbor told us he had punched the previous renter in the face and refused to pay him for a day's work for his company. He had bragged about renting to illegal immigrants and not having to do anything because they wouldn't sue. We had a newborn baby, so we called his bluff and agreed to find a new place to live. We left the home in much better shape than we found it. He said he would mail us the security deposit, but never did. He dodged my phone calls until one day he called to say, "You aren't getting it back. You broke the contract when you left early, so go screw yourself." I was really upset because we were new parents and had very little money. That $300 was a big deal to us and a drop in the bucket for this man. He owned an upscale painting business and had 15 rental properties. The next week, I was online leaving negative reviews for his business when I clicked a link and noticed his website's domain had just lapsed. I knew what I had to do. I immediately bought it, then created a homepage with contact info for his biggest competitor. I emailed him from his old domain, asking if he wanted to buy the website for $320. The cost of the security deposits plus the price I paid for the domain. He was irate. He started calling my work, threatening to sue my employer. He even contacted my parents and threatened to sue them. He left a bunch of threatening voicemails for me, saying he was going to beat me up and he knows where I live and he has my social security number. I received emails from several review sites asking if I was trying to update the contact info for the business. He must have used his old domain's email as his contact email. I didn't want to get in trouble for impersonating his business, so I did not respond. The contact info was never changed. I received a few emails from potential clients. I called him and told him about the painting job requests. I gave him the contact info for one of the clients to prove I wasn't just making it up. I told him it was the last time I was going to do that for him and suggested he buy the website back in order to not miss out on any other jobs. He told me he was taking me to court. I told him I had recorded his threatening phone calls and saved all his texts and voicemails. He said he was going to sue me for illegally recording him, which is not illegal in my state. I said, "I look forward to seeing you in court where I countersue and press charges for harassing me." And I hung up. He called me back and cussed me out for hanging up on him. I said, "Call me back when you can speak respectfully to me," and hung up again. We repeated this about 5 times. Each time he was more angry until the last time. He spoke respectfully and explained he hadn't got a single job in months. I suggested he focus more on creating a website to find business. He lost it and cussed me out again. 6 months passed and he still hadn't bought the website from me. I get a call from him begging me to do the right thing and give him the website back. I told him the current price is $350. 6 months later, I get another phone call. I told him the current price is $380. Eventually, he texted me to say, "I went out of business. I hope you're happy." I responded, "I hear having a website really helps your business. $380 and it's yours." He told me what a terrible person I am and said, "Calm as a beer." I responded, "Maybe if you stopped trying to rip people off, your karma wouldn't be so bad." That's the last time I ever heard from him. The major business listing site confirmed his business did indeed close. I renewed the domain for another 2 years just in case he was bluffing. A few months later, I drove by his office to see if it was still there. It was empty with a "For Rent" sign posted. I never got that $300 back and spent money on domain registrations, but it was totally worth it. Edit: I removed pricing and domain renewal timeline because I was estimating it and it was bothering people. It was in 2013 through GoDaddy, but if it really matters to you, I can send screenshots of verifying emails, company info, and the domain address. Just message me because I can't post it here, or it would break the rules of not giving out personal info. Wouldn't messaging people break the rules of giving out personal info? I don't understand. Anyway guys, our next post is by Counterstreet, titled Height Approved. I originally posted this in malicious compliance, but I think it belongs here too. This isn't my story, but my parents'. It was probably the first time I witnessed malicious compliance, and I still remember it well. It was about 25 years ago, So I was about 8 years old, and we had just moved into a 150-year-old house that was in need of major repairs. My dad, thinking ahead, knew he would need a large garage and workshop to really get started on the renovations properly. On the edge of our yard was an ancient barn that was falling apart and needed to be torn down. My dad figured this was the best place to build his new workshop, so that was the plan. We had met and were on good terms with all of the neighbors at that point. When the plans for the new workshop were finished, my parents went around to all the neighbors as a courtesy to show them the plans and get their blessings. The neighbors whose property the current barn and new workshop would border, I'll call them the Peters, were concerned about the height. The existing barn was 16 foot high, and they asked if we could only build it 1 story, 12 foot max, as to not block the sun in their yard. Sure, no problem. My parents agreed. They wanted to go for 2 stories for extra storage, but just 1 wasn't a deal breaker. So the old barn was torn down and the foundation laid for the new one. During that time, there was a falling out with the Peters and my parents. I'm not sure what happened, but it turned nasty. One day, my brother and I were playing street hockey, and Mr. Peters came out yelling at us to get off the road, you half-breed craps. My dad is black, so we're both half black. You'd have to earn your place in this town. What's wrong with him? Upon hearing this, my mum had to physically restrain my dad from going over and beating the living crap out of him. Eventually he cooled off and started on his plan. The plans for 1 story went out the window. Soon, the new garage that was only supposed to be 1 story soon gained a 2nd in the blueprints. If they were going to direct racist comments at his kids, my dad would build what he wanted. As the construction started, the Peters came over to ask why there was 2 stories being built and were told to go screw themselves. We didn't hear from them again until the roof started to go on. The bylaws of the township limited all out structures to 24 foot high. The Peters called the township and then a building inspector, claiming that the new garage was over 24 foot high. If it was over height, the entire thing would have to be torn down and rebuilt, costing us tens of thousands of dollars. I remember the Peters standing there, watching the inspector with smug looks on their faces. 2 days later, we got the final report back from the township and inspector, 23 feet 11 inches, just as my dad had drawn up in his new plans. He sent me up on the roof of the garage, just plywood, no singles yet, with some spray paint, and had me write 23 feet 11 inches, height approved, in 2-foot neon orange letters across the entire roof, facing their yard and house. Not only did the garage block all sunlight from reaching their yard, but my dad waited until everything else was done before he shingled that side of the roof. They had to stare at those neon orange letters for almost 3 years. We didn't hear a peep from them for the next 10 years until they moved. Rightio, and our next post is by user MadBruh3991, titled Pastor Lies, Cheats and Steals. He gets exactly what he deserves. If you want to read on YouTube, that's okay with me. You can call me Caldra or OP, as my username is not easy. Thanks, Caldra. Sorry I'm on mobile. Also, I'm sorry, but I need to be very vague about where this happened. That's alright, Caldra. Love you. The cast: Pastor Bob, not real name, Contractor, and me, Caldra, or OP if you want. It's fine with me, Caldra. You Caldra. Setup: I have been a computer technician for more than 15 years. I have worked on all kinds of computers. Everything from tiny point-of-sale computers to large rack server computers. I had been attending a new church to me. I was trying to date a woman there. This church was her idea. That relationship crashed and burned, but that's a different story. Sorry to hear, Caldra. Now, we can start. It was about 5 years ago. I had just sat through a long sermon about generosity and giving to those that need help. At the end of the sermon, Pastor Bob asked for an additional donation because the church's roofs needed repairs, and it would cost $20,000 US. That's right, 20,000 freedom dollars for a new roof. After the service, I'm talking to my date. Pastor Bob walks over to me. I said hi, and he introduced himself. We talk a bit. Pastor Bob asked what I do for a living. I tell him I'm a computer tech with a shop. As I'm telling him, I have a feeling he already knows what I do. Pastor Bob asks me to have a look at his laptop. It's being very slow, so I agree. I turn the laptop on and I hear a clicking noise. This clues me in it's probably the hard drive, but I can still access the data. This is a good thing because it means I can probably recover the data. So I tell Pastor Bob the hard drive is dying and it needs to be replaced. I also tell him I can probably recover the data. Pastor Bob asked how much it would cost to fix. I tell him for most people I would charge around $250. However, I feel I can donate my time, so I would need just $60 for a new hard drive. Pastor Bob agrees, so I write up an invoice. New hard drive, $60, labor, $0, data recovery, $0, and 2 to 4 days for the repair. Pastor Bob signed the invoice, thus I take the laptop to my shop. I open the laptop. HP, why do you use so many screws and clips? I get the hard drive out and connect it to my recovery rig. I set up the recovery to clone the data to a new hard drive, but not the new one for the laptop, a high-end storage drive. I go home after locking up the shop. Next day, Monday, I open the shop and check the recovery rig. It's working, but it will take at least 10 more hours. So I start to work on other tickets. Then at closing time, I lock up and go home. Next day, Tuesday, I've had Pastor Bob's laptop for 2 days. I open the shop and check my recovery rig. Good news, recovery completed 100% data recovered. Report says hard drive developed too many bad sectors. Now I have a choice. I could put a 1TB hard drive for $60 or a 120GB SSD for $60. Or I could pay some money myself for a 240GB SSD for $100. I decided why not, and put the 240GB SSD into the laptop. I then clone all the data over from the new recovery storage drive to the new 240GB solid-state drive. An hour later, the clone is done. So, I check everything, the laptop works great, and is exactly like how it was before the first hard drive had died. Even the logins still worked. Therefore, I call Pastor Bob and tell him his computer is done. He says that's great and he will be there soon to get it. About 45 minutes later, Pastor Bob walks in. I show him his laptop working and much faster. He loves it and signs the pickup form. He then pays me with a check for $60. It's important he paid with a check. I do a bank run on Monday and Friday, so that Friday at the bank I am informed that Pastor Bob's check is void. What? Why? Pastor Bob had placed a stop payment on the check. Consequently, I called him and he ignored my call. I go to church on Sunday. Pastor Bob gives a sermon about not lying. I walk up to talk to him and he avoids me. So I leave and decide I'm going to write it off. I spent $100 and some time to do something nice. A few weeks later, a customer walks in looking for a new computer. To welcome him, I offer him a drink and go over his options. I'm chatting him up and he tells me he is a contractor. He mostly does siding and roofing. He is thinking about offering solar, that's why he is getting a new computer. I ask how much does a new roof cost? He says up to about $10,000. So I ask him why would someone say $20,000? He had no idea. I thought it was strange. I asked about the church. Contractor said it would have been simple and about $5,000, and he could probably do it for less. Contractor buys a nice new laptop. Sorry the setup took so long, the revenge starts now. Something about what the contractor said bugs me later. Why would Pastor Bob lie and say $20,000 for a new roof, and why would he stiff me for $60? I then remember I never cleared the recovery rig storage drive. I check and there it is, Pastor Bob's laptop data. I look around. It's slow and I'm all caught up on repair tickets. Fittingly, I looked around a bit. He had all of his logins stored in a folder on the desktop, including his online dating logins and online poker. Did I ever mention Pastor Bob is married? I start printing his online dating messages. I look back and find Pastor Bob had been adult hugging several women from his online dating. He had been paying for his dates from the church's donation fund. I'm getting angry now. Then I realized he had adult hugged the woman I was dating when I was dating her. Jesus Christ. It was then I decided to break Pastor Bob. I printed out all his dating messages and the women he adult hugged for the last 6 months, except I refused to print the naughty pictures. It was an impressive packet. I then decide I need copies of the packet. Therefore, I order 100 packets printed from a major online printer. A few days later, my order of revenge packets arrived. These revenge packets are amazing double-sided, staple bound with a cover with Pastor Bob's face on it. Now the conclusion, and I think it's worth it. This church had a calendar of what the sermon might be about. A perfect Sunday was approaching. I go to church that perfect Sunday. I show up a bit late. Everyone is in the church, so I put a revenge packet on each car. I have a few revenge packets that are in yellow envelopes. Fittingly, I put them in the mail. I sent one to all the high-ups in the church, and I sent a special packet with some of Pastor Bob's naughty pics to Pastor Bob's wife. I set the return address to the church. I also emailed a bunch of people the revenge packet from a burner email. A couple weeks later, after I went back to the church, Pastor Bob was gone, so was the wife. Several of the women were also gone, including the one I was dating. I asked one of the important people there what happened. The answer was amazing. I was told about the revenge packet and how everyone had gotten one. The day my revenge packet appeared, the sermon Pastor Bob had given was about the evils of adultery and cheating on your wife. Thank you, church calendar. The fallout. Pastor Bob was fired and shunned. Multiple women from the church have not returned, including the one I was dating. Pastor Bob's wife is divorcing him, and she is the one that owned the house and the cars. No longer Pastor Bob is now being sued by several people, including the one that fixed the roof. He never paid any of them. There were also rumors of a criminal case of embezzlement. No one has seen Bob in a while now. The church might close if they can't find a new pastor, but the church's money is very low. Apparently, he also spent over $30,000 on online gambling. TLDR, Pastor lies, steals and cheats on his wife with multiple women, gets found out and doxxed, gets fired, divorced and arrested, and no one knows I did this to him. Notes, because you might ask. It's quite possible that several of the very young children and babies at church were his, but I cannot confirm this. I have no idea where Bob is now. I would think still in jail. Edit, thank you so much for the awards. It's amazing. Alright, that was a sick story. Thank you for that one. I really liked that one. Pro-revenge aside, what are the legal ramifications of taking a customer's data and giving it out without permission? I'm all for what you did, but also you don't want to give Pastor Bob a means by which he can come back to you with a lawsuit that you can't win. That is a good question. I see it as when he stopped payment on that check. He voided any privacy protection I would have given. I don't know if that's how the courts would see it or not. Right? If he didn't actually pay for a service, is he still considered a customer? Or did Bob just give his computer and all of his personal information to a guy he knows from church? What are your legal obligations as a professional if you're not being paid for your service? And didn't OP technically pay for that information since he paid $100 for the new hard drive for the laptop? So many questions. I mean, you guys can give me an opinion on that one. I feel like you're still not allowed to do it regardless. I feel like there's information protections. It's like technically hacking in a way. I read so much legal advice and I still don't even know. That's such a gray area. I don't know if I can condone that. Anyway guys, this is the end of our revenge episode today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Tell me what you thought of it down in the comments below. I'd love to know your opinions. And as always, Dab. This has been Marky. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.